This is Mr. Chemansky, and I'm not even going to pretend I can pronounce his first name. He is a very interesting poet because he's not like all the other poets that we learn about in school. He was born in Odessa, which was a part of the former Soviet Union. I believe now it's in the modern day Ukraine, but when he was born in it, they called it the Soviet Union. He immigrated here to the United States, and he was granted asylum when he came here. But he was only in the country less than a year when his father died. And he was 17 years old when that happened in 1994. He's newly arrived to the country. He's got lots of these emotions going on, and he thought he would sit down and write some poetry about it. And that's what we're exactly taught to do, to process difficult emotions with words, with poems, with art. But listen to his quote, and you'll know why I like him so much. This is what he says. Making beautiful rhymes about my father's death didn't feel right. He says, it felt like a betrayal to make art out of the breath of someone whose warm breath only some weeks or days ago was next to mine. And now it was just the page, the pen, the rhyme. I love that. I love that. Because he says, I can't turn my pain into art. I can't do it. And I admire that about him, right? That's amazing to me that, he stands against the other poets in that regard. Now, the thing about this poem in particular is that he wrote it in English, and that is not his native language. This is what he says. He says, that's how my writing in English began, with his father's death. And then I realized that this gave me one last chance to speak to my father still, in English. It was a private language, a language no one else in my family knew. Isn't that interesting? Like, he writes in a language his father didn't understand in order to talk about these private emotions. But yet now he shares them with strangers, but strangers that aren't his own family. Isn't that interesting? He says, English is the language of my wife, the language of love, of friendships, of adulthood, of freedom of movement from one place to another, one city to another, a language I hear in my streets now. So he writes this poem you're about to hear in English. But that explains why he wrote in English, not in his native language. But the other question is, why poetry? Why not some form of art? If it's too painful to record his big feelings of his father's death, but why now? So I'm going to let his own words speak for him, and this is another quote from him. He's such an interesting person. He says, I think that a lyric poet is someone who is a very private person, and their poetry becomes great poetry only if they, in their privacy, are able to craft a language interesting enough, magical enough, to speak privately to many people at the same time. Right? That's right there is why I like him. So this poem in particular is about America, but he also thinks that this poem parallels America now and Rome back then. So there's a lot to think about in this poem, but yet it's still very, very simple. Okay? Here we go. We lived happily during the war. And when they bombed other people's homes, we protested. But not enough. We opposed them, but not enough. I was in my bed, around my bed. America was falling. Invisible house by invisible house by invisible house. I took a chair outside and watched the sun. In the 6th month of a disastrous reign, in the house of money, in the city of money, our great country of money, forgive us, we lived happily during the war.